Hello, Hoops fans, and happy Friday. We have made it to opening day for the WNBA, celebrating their 30th season, tipping off tonight. Richard, I know this maybe seemed far off, not even 6 weeks ago, if the season was going to be here. We have made it. We've seen a flurry of obviously training camp and transactions. But just general thoughts on the 30th season for this league tipping off.
Well, like you said, I'm glad we got here in the end. There were a couple of times there where you thought, we'd probably get a season, but it might not be starting May 8th, right? Yeah, May
Yep.
8th, like they scheduled in the first place. It looked like they were going to have to push some games or reorganize or maybe play fewer than 44. But yeah, we're here. We're going to get a season just like every other year, and yeah, happy to get started.
Yeah, I think one notable thing about starting the 30th season is we have 31 players this year that will make over $1 million for the first time in league history. One more in Kelsey Plum at $999,999. So if we wanted to add an extra dollar there, we could bump that up to 32 players. But again, just like I know as someone, an enthusiast of the league, just the growth and like where we're at now, just in salary alone. Talk a little bit just about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest leap that we've ever seen in this league. This is what everyone wanted to be a free agent before this off season in order to sign these contracts that we've seen. That it's not just that it's over 1 million for this season; it's that players are signing for 3 years, nearly 4 million total. We don't even know what players like Boston, Stewart, Ionescu, Wilson are going to earn because they've signed for 20 or 17% of the cap, which could be more like 1.5 up, getting on towards 2 million by the end of those deals. So yeah, these are the numbers that we've wanted to start reporting. When I've been sort of reporting contracts in previous years and telling people about, you know, teams are $50 under the salary cap, or they couldn't sign you until tomorrow because then they would have been $5 over and now they're $7 under. Instead, we're talking about $1.5 million contracts and these sorts of numbers. Yeah, it's a nice feeling when we had to find room to add digits to the salary cap sheets. There had to be extra room because the numbers are longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's three players this year signed for the Supermax of 1.4 in Asia Wilson, Nafisa Collier, and Kelsey Mitchell. So, that's the Supermax this year. And like you said, several others who have signed on to, that increase over the years. You've recently put out yesterday and today, some roster breakdowns for each team. I think today would be a great time just to kind of go through those. I know first off, I consider you, to me anyway, like the WNBA guru of all like the fine print that most people probably skip over but need to understand in terms of how roster makeup happens, in terms of hardship contracts or what players can be suspended or partially suspended. So just right off the bat, before we even kind of get into each roster, which I think obviously will come up, do you want to just generally talk about like what that looks like in terms of being able to suspend partially or those hardship contracts?
Well, the rule this year, under the new CBA, is that rosters now have to be 12 players. So that removes one of the complications we always used to have, where they could be 11 or 12. It's just around 12, not counting the development player spots, which we'll inevitably talk about. But so every team has to get down to 12 players, except that if players haven't arrived yet, or if they arrived injured, in the case of the two in Portland, I think it is, then players can be temporarily suspended, which means you can activate them once they arrive or once they're healthy. And if the team has enough cap space, they can fill that roster spot that's opened up by temporarily suspending these unavailable players. So we've seen teams like Seattle, I think, has 13. I think Portland currently have 14. So there are certain teams that are currently carrying more than 12 players on the roster. But then you've got teams like New York who, because they have essentially filled up the salary cap or close to it with their 12 players, even though two of them are still playing in Spain, and their playoffs don't finish for another couple of weeks yet. Um, they can't add anyone else into those roster spots because you would need the cap space to add that 13th or 14th player, and they just don't have the room. So New York, we've already seen signed hardships because they've got both those two players missing still in Spain and injuries on top of that. So they're eligible to add players via hardship exceptions.
Perfect. Yeah, and I know, like I said, I think when we get into more rosters, we'll be able to talk a little bit about those. But I thought right off the bat, if you ever need information, I always direct people to your Twitter or Blue Sky or wherever they can get that information, because I feel like you always, really explain it well. But let's just get started. I think with your roster breakdown on day one, top of the list here was the Chicago Sky. They made a flurry of offseason moves. Somewhat baffling, but I feel like that's kind of been the theme of the front office. They're protecting the players in the expansion draft, end up, cutting both of those. They did sign Westbeld back to that development contract, but just, start with this guy, kind of, thoughts on their roster, in a brief recap of what they, kind of have going into this season.
I mean, this is an interesting team in that they've added so much talent that we weren't really expecting them to be able to add because of their facilities, because of the number of players you've asked out of Chicago in the past. I don't think people thought that this kind of level of talent of player would be choosing Chicago when they were in free agency and had options. So being able to add Diggins and Stevens, they traded for Rickea Jackson, they added Natasha Cloud at the last minute to try and help fill in the point guard spot. This is a more talented team than we were expecting, and the Sky could be better than we were expecting as a result. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see because obviously you've got to try and piece all of these new pieces together, and we don't know what the whole is going to look like yet.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Obviously, the big offseason trade of Angel Reese, so kind of the new look there. But like you said, added a lot of talent, via free agency, which again, not a lot of people were expecting. So I think there's a lot of intrigue surrounding Chicago, like you said, just because of the talent they did. The next one, I think, they made a lot of obviously noise in free agency as well. And then having the number one pick is the Dallas Wings. They added AZ Fudd as the overall number one to already last year's in Paige Beckers. And then, went out, signed Alana Smith, Jessica Shepard, signing Enrique back. So kind of just, general thoughts on the Dallas Wings.
I think the most interesting part is going to be how Enrique fits in this team now that they've added a lot of pieces, that they've kind of become Paige's team last year when Enrique missed a bunch of games injured. And I mean, she's missed most of the Enrique's missed most of the preseason, so we don't know how fit she is for the regular season. I think that this is a team that's ready to get to take a step forward with the post players that they've added. They look a lot more solid, a lot more reliable inside. And obviously, there's a lot of perimeter talent when you've got Beckers at the controls, you've got Fudd coming in, you got Sims from the start of the season this time, so that gives them a little bit more sort of confidence and reliability at the point as well. And then whatever happens with Enrique, but yeah, I do think the most interesting part to me as a non-Wings fan is how Enrique fits. Is she part of the starting lineup? Is she still getting 15 shots a game in this lineup? Is she willing to take less of a role within the framework that they've now got? I'm not sure how it's going to work out.
Yeah, and obviously bringing in the new coach and Jose Fernandez there,
Yeah.
and there were a couple clips over the last week of, just how much Jose wanted Enrique to come back to the Wings. So you would expect there has been a lot of conversation between especially those two and how she fits. In their preseason games, I think we've seen a team that looks much better. And so I'm certainly excited to see kind of how that one plays out. They will open tomorrow against the next team you had in the preview in the Indiana Fever, which that alone has 4 of the last first draft picks, which is pretty remarkable given kind of where those two teams are. Obviously, the Fever are very excited to have Caitlin Clark back and healthy. They were able to retain Kelsey Mitchell. They have Aaliyah Boston. Really, they, like you said in your preview, were a team that you kind of knew what their roster was going to be, even, into training camp. They didn't do a lot of, additional pieces outside of training camp. So you kind of knew. I think, the expectation for the Fever, in my opinion, there's a lot of people that are championship or bust. I think that's a little high in terms of what they have, but what are your thoughts on the Fever, Richard?
I mean, inevitably, when Caitlin Clark's on a team, there are going to be a lot of people expecting them to win every game, pretty much. But I think definitely expectations are high for this squad, as they should be, really, because if they can stay healthy, you're adding Clark to a team that won a playoff round last year, that has Boston, has Kelsey Mitchell, who was all WNBA first team last year. This There's a lot of talent here. They've added sort of veteran pieces rather than going out for youth, so they kind of know what they're getting in the Ty Harris, Walker Kimbrough, Billings, Hines Allen inside. So these are veterans who know how to play the game, know their role and what they're doing on this sort of squad. I think they can win a lot of games, but yeah, you're going to need health. They're reliant on better health than they had last season, because last year it seemed like that was a constant struggle for them to piece together the team that was playing on any given night. So they were just constantly reliant on Mitchell and Boston to carry them through. If they can stay in one piece, then who knows how good they can be.
Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, what a remarkable run they had with a roster. Like you said, you never kind of knew who was even going to be available any given night. I do love the addition of Raven Johnson this year. I think she provides something a little unique to what that roster already has. So definitely excited, especially for that game tomorrow, just to kind of see where those two teams are at. Turn the page here to the Aces, the defending champs, obviously anchored by Asia Wilson. They didn't go out and do a ton in the offseason. What are your thoughts on the Aces? Do you see them in position to repeat, not only as champions, but obviously Asia Wilson as the MVP as well?
I mean, they didn't do that much, but they did basically bring everyone back that they needed to from their core. So ultimately, when you've won 3 out of the last 4 championships, the priority is you make sure that that as many people as possible stick around rather than trying to add. I mean, they've got little pieces, sort of Steph Talbot can help on the wing. Parker Tyus won't be pregnant this year, so she should be more available. But Kennedy Carter is going to be interesting to see what she can do, whether she fits in with this squad. Obviously, people have had concerns with her in the past, so she's an incredibly talented player. This team certainly can repeat again. I mean, apart from maybe Chelsea Gray getting a little older, and it's not like she was ever super reliant on quickness. So I think all she's really doing is getting smarter. And yeah, I don't see much drop off coming there. So there's not much reason for any of these players to have gotten worse, unless the disease of more that I mentioned in the article that Pat Riley used to talk about. Whenever a team wins, people start wanting more shots, more money, more prestige. But the Aces have managed to stave that off for the last 3 years. So yeah, this is a contender again. Obviously, the only major pitfall could ever be a Wilson injury, but she seems to stay away from that, generally speaking, as well. So yeah, this is absolutely a title contender.
Yeah, well, and I think like your comment about wanting more. I mean, we look at the role that Jewel Lloyd ended up playing for this team last year, coming off the bench. And so certainly I think they have a culture where they've been able to, like you say, kind of stave that off. And like you said, keeping everyone. Sometimes the best ones you have are the ones, that you keep are the ones you already have. Sometimes that's the best recipe for success. And so I like the little additions, like you said, in Carter for that team just as a scorer, which sometimes I think they missed last year outside of Jackie Young, just someone maybe consistently for them that could help relieve some of the pressure on Asia Wilson. The next team are the Sparks. I think Obviously some off-season changes there, some good additions. What are your just general thoughts here on the Sparks, what they did in the off-season going into this year?
I mean, when I was sort of writing about them, it sort of came home. This is a really veteran team now with the changes that they've made, which kind of means you're looking to win immediately because this isn't building a squad for the future anymore. Apart from Cameron Brink, their sort of central players are mostly 30 plus. So there's talent here. Obviously, the starting lineup, adding Necker, Ariel Atkins is maybe sort of more of a veteran piece than Rickea Jackson that they swapped out. So maybe you're more reliable on what you're getting game to game, even if you don't have necessarily the explosion or the potential to develop that Jackson had. And yeah, I think they can beat anyone on any given night, but whether sort of below the top five, whether they've got the depth of talent to really contend, I would question. I'm not sure they're that good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, the big piece for them last year was just on the defensive end of things, trying, to string enough stops together. So certainly something to watch. I think one of the biggest teams that had, really a lot of turnover this year and kind of what we've expected to see on the court for the Minnesota Lynx, we will not be seeing this season just because of how many players left via free agency and in the draft. Just what are your thoughts on the Lynx? Obviously, Nafisa Collier's still injured, not returning yet. They did add Olivia Miles in the draft, who I think is going to have an outstanding, professional career. Certainly, someone that I think will be in the mix for Rookie of the Year. But just where are you at with the Minnesota Lynx?
Yeah, they this is not the same team anymore. They've lost so many players from that squad the last 2 years that was a championship contender. They're still probably going to be good because Collier will get healthy. And when you've got Nafisa Collier as your star and Cheryl Reeve as your head coach, chances are you're at least going to be a decent team. The problem, whether they've now got enough to be a championship contender like they have been, seems questionable. And also, a lot of what they had the last 2 years was built on chemistry, and they've lost so many pieces that they're now going to have to rebuild that chemistry. You're bringing in Miles who'll play a lot of minutes. You're going to need to get something from Dorka Uhash, and we still don't know how healthy she is after the ankle injury at the EuroLeague finals. There are a lot of young pieces where I'm looking forward to seeing what they get from Kosu in her second year, from Checheva coming over to add in the post. But yeah, what the whole looks like, you would expect some drop off from last year, but the question is how far.
Yeah, I think certainly that's going to be really interesting. And like you said, with Nafisa out, like the chemistry in terms of new pieces, what that looks like. So maybe a team that the first half, you're kind of struggling to see where that, is long term, but maybe mid season, we're seeing a team that we think can be there at the end. I think one of the teams that has just really kind of turned the league upside down in terms of their youth. By far, the youngest team in the league is the Washington Mystics. You mentioned in the article, it's not like they went out and got a bunch of veteran players to kind of balance out the youth. They are a total youth movement outside of a couple players. What are your thoughts on the Mystics? Going into really the year two of an entire youth movement.
I mean, it's an interesting experiment in that we so rarely see rebuilding teams basically go with no veterans. That the only experience this team has got is sort of Shakira Austin, Michaela Onyenwere, which these are players who would be fairly mid-level, or even youngsters on certain other squads. But they're the closest to veteran, unless you're going to count Alex Wilson, who's never played in the WNBA before, but is 32 years old. So kind of a veteran, but not for this league. And yeah, they're going to be fun to watch, but inevitably youth means mistakes, means growing pains. But yeah, there's a lot of talent there, and I mean they were pretty good last year for a team that's as young as they are. So second year jump for Iriafen and Citron, and yeah, they can be good. But yeah, they're so young, an unbelievably young squad. I I saw someone on, I think it was Jen Hatfield's, call them the youngest teams on average since 2000, which people didn't have experience in the league at that point because the league had only been around for 3 years. So that's why that team was that inexperienced then. Whereas this lot, it's because they've gone so young with so many rookies. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think I saw a post this morning. The average age of the Mystics is 23.6. So in terms of experience, I mean that is very young. I think especially obviously stateside for this team is so many people are familiar with these names because of their stars in college, and they've been able to move into that role in the professional ranks. I'm very excited to see Georgia Amore to this team, someone who missed all last season. Certainly that's someone I'm excited to see. And then obviously Lauren Betts to see, kind of what her rookie year looks like. So definitely excited there. We made it to part 2 of the roster breakdown, which went out this morning. So you've been a busy man. Let's see here. The first team we had was the Dream, who I think a team that, in Carl Semesko's first year kind of surprised some people in terms of what they were able to do. They went and added Angel Reese in the offseason. They did have some other losses in terms of, via free agency. But, kind of what are your thoughts on the Dream here going into Semesko's year 2 and the expectations that this team has?
I think the expectations are going to be up and around becoming a championship contender because there's no real reason this team should be any worse than last year, and they won 30 games last year. Semesko's system has now sort of settled in. They brought back nearly the whole core, so all of these people should be comfortable in this system. You're adding Reese in, so yeah, they're going to be aiming high. Whether they can, stay healthy. Brianna Jones is already starting the season injured. Whether they've got the depth necessarily, the wings are inexperienced behind Gray and Howard, but I'm a big fan of Holly Winterburn as a fellow Brit, so yeah, hoping to see her thrive with the Dream. But yeah, they're going to be aiming high. We'll see how it plays out, but yeah, this is a team that won't surprise anyone as much as they did last year, but should be more settled than they were.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. I'm looking forward to see kind of what their season turns out to be. The next one you had was the Connecticut Sun, who are spending their last year there. A team that, I mean, they had some losses. They went and added some pieces. They were on the younger end last year, I think. Just, what are your, takeaways from the Sun and their offseason and kind of the expectations here last year in Connecticut before moving to Houston?
Yeah, I mean, this is the slightly more traditional version of the rebuild than Washington, in that this is an incredibly young team, but with a couple of veterans added that you often see to sort of help teach the kids what the league's all about. Because they brought Griner in, they brought Kennedy Burke in. Other than that, the focus of the season has to be developing all of these youngsters, seeing how good Rivers and Lacan and Morrow can be, and also not just developing them but assessing them, because they've got so many young pieces that you have to figure out which of these you're going to want to pay once they're off their rookie scale contracts, which of these players you think are part of your core long term, and who is just going to move on and you're just going to look for other pieces. Because I imagine once they're in Houston, they'll be looking more in free agency and to try and become a better team more quickly. But yeah, for the time being, it's about the kids, even though Griner will be the headline attraction, I imagine.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. Just a team that has a lot of youth that are you're right, trying to assess if they're, the pieces that you're going to continue to try to build around. Last year's surprise team in the, obviously it was the expansion team in the Golden State Valkyries. They are a team that really, they did obviously add some pieces. They lost a couple of players, but they are so guard and wing heavy, and you even talk about it in your assessment. But how I think as an expansion team, they obviously set the bar incredibly high last year. They're going into this season. Do you see them surpassing what they were able to do last year? Do you think it's kind of, will they regress to the mean of what, kind of an expansion team does? Thoughts on the Valkyries?
I mean, I'm not going to underestimate them after what this group and what Nakase managed to pull off last year. don't think anyone was expecting them to win as many games as they did. Adding Gabby Williams means this team is so strong on the wing, but the loss of Ileana Repair, who they announced yesterday is pregnant, so is presumably not going to play all year, is big for them because they were already pretty thin in terms of post players, and she was basically the only one who can shoot out of the ones that they've got. So yeah, how they're going to cope with that, who they might try to add, I'm not sure. But yeah, this they might struggle against teams that can attack them in the paint. But I am looking forward to seeing what all of these wings can do and what sort of crazy lineups and unusual defenses Nakase can come up with to compensate for that lack of size in the paint.
Yeah, and you did mention Ileana Repair announced, via pregnancy, probably missing a whole season. Do you just want to like catch, our viewers or listeners up to speed? Kind of, we know we don't have the full CBA, the new one to read, but kind of how that looks, obviously, for a league like the WNBA where players do miss because of pregnancy.
Yeah, I mean, we don't obviously have the full details of the rule, but we're assuming it's going to be similar to what they brought in under the last CBA because that was an update during the document rather than written in stone. Then, yeah, they'll be allowed to replace Repair, but presumably it was sort of fairly late news given that they only just applied for the replacement player. So yeah, under the old agreement, it was somebody up to their applicable minimum. It's possible the new deal lets them sign someone for up to Repair's salary, but what I would expect is just that the replacement player can sign for up to their minimum salary. Who they'll find out there on the open market at this point is a question. I mean, obviously this team has a lot of international players. Maybe they can give Emma Mieseman a call, but you imagine they would have done that already. So who knows?
Yeah, it definitely will be interesting to see. I mean, a huge loss for the Valkyries, but like you said, I don't think it's a team, to underestimate. Next one is the Liberty. They were able to obviously keep Inescu, Stewart, Jones intact. I think, like every other year for this team, since it's been, kind of in years past, championship or bust. Thoughts on the Liberty?
Lots of talent, similar to previous years. The aim is, like you said, to raise another banner. Adding Sabali is going to be interesting. How she fits on this squad. I mean, she's injured already. We've obviously seen, unfortunately, she's missed a lot of time in the WNBA. Yeah, hopefully this team actually manages to stay healthy enough to show us what they can do. I'm looking forward with the Liberty to seeing how a lot of players that people may not have heard of in the US perform for them as backups once this squad is complete. Pauline Astier is someone I've wanted to see in the WNBA for a while. So is Raquel Carrera. So yeah, adding those players in, Benija Laney Hamilton getting healthy again as well. This is a deep team, so they can do more than just be their stars. They can go deep down the bench and keep attacking you with everybody.
Yeah, and I think, like the depth will matter for this team, obviously because of injuries, but also you do mention Stewart and Jones are not the youngsters that they once were. And so when you add the depth and pieces that are capable, it alleviates some of the pressure, I think, on those two to be as good as they were, and certainly still playing at a very high level. But I think, again, when you add those pieces, there's a little bit less, expectation of them to do as they've always done. The Phoenix Mercury are a team, again, who I think, they add a lot of players that I think some people aren't always familiar with. And so it takes a while to get their roster kind of down and up to speed. But what they did last year, I think, in terms of the additions, especially internationally, they even added a few rookies that were older last year. And so just thoughts on the Mercury, kind of where they're at. I know they still obviously have some players they are waiting for to come over, but what do you see the Mercury, doing this season?
I mean, never underestimate a team that's got Alyssa Thomas at the controls, basically. Kalia Copper looked great in preseason as well, looked sort of back to her absolute peak after sort of being limited by injury last year. So, yeah, the ceiling is still pretty high, but without Sabali, you wonder if they're as good as last year. They're going to have to hit on some of these players they're bringing across. Valerian Ai is a player who has a lot of experience now and is will be pretty reliable for them. I think they kind of know what they're going to get from her, even though she hasn't played in the WNBA in over a decade, which is kind of extraordinary that you can have that gap between games in one league. But yeah, they're going to be they're certainly going to be competitive. The question is whether they can be as good as they were last year.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting, like you said, missing Sabali, but certainly some pieces to fill that void. Down to, I think, 3 teams left. Next one is one expansion team in the Portland Fire. I think that what the Fire are doing is really kind of what you expect out of an expansion team. They didn't get any huge signings in free agency. They did add some pieces. They have some youth. What do you think of the Fire, like their roster construction, what that looks like for this team? And how do you see that kind of the foundation for them going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think Golden State have reshaped what we expect to see from an expansion team. This looks, at least on the face of it, like a more traditional outlook for an expansion team. You've got, a few mismatch pieces, some youngsters you're hoping might still be part of the team when you're good in a couple of years' time. But yeah, you're hoping that the fans are excited to have a team regardless of how good they are, and you can develop some kids, maybe lose a lot of games, maybe fall into the number one pick next year, and then you're selling yourself on Hannah Hidalgo or someone like that as your superstar. But yeah, for now, this looks like maybe the worst team in the league without wishing to be unfair to Portland. They've got a fair way to go.
Yeah, I think you never want to say the worst team in the league, but when you're looking at just the roster construction alone, I think obviously a lot of questions and what they will look like. They went out, got Bridget Carlton, who I think will take a obviously much bigger role for this Fire team than she did in Minnesota. But I'm excited to see what it looks like as the season progresses, and like you said, the pieces that could still be there for this team as they continue to grow. Another team that just has a total different roster, really, from last season is the Seattle Storm. What do you think of this Storm, your kind of expectations, and where you see their season headed?
I mean, we're going to have to wait a little bit because our fam is still in Spain and Ezi Magbigor's hurt. But this is one of the teams I'm really excited to see play, even though there's obviously been so much turnover from last year. The sort of three-headed monster is what I called it in the article, but with trying to fit Fam and Magbigor and Dominique Malonga together and seeing what that looks like in the post, and then Jordan Horston back from injury alongside Floje on the wing could be really exciting as well if they're healthy and if they're playing together and that whole unit comes together. So this is a really interesting team, and much as it's sort of the start of a rebuild, like I said in the article, rebuilds don't usually start with this volume of talent. You've got some potential absolute superstars in this squad. So yeah, it might be the first year of a new generation, but in some ways this is a more exciting roster than they had last year, even though last year had a lot more recognizable star names in it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly some younger pieces that are going to be exciting for this Storm team going forward. A lot of intrigue, I think, surrounding what they could be. We are down to the last team, the other expansion team this season in the Toronto Tempo. Obviously, Sandy Brondello, takes over there. I think, again, a little bit of a different look for an expansion team, a different, I think, roster process than, let's say, the Portland Fire in this offseason. But, thoughts on the tempo and, kind of what we, expect to see from this team.
Yeah, I think they're more a team that's trying to be good immediately rather than looking directly to the draft. I'm not sure how well it's necessarily going to work out. I mean, with all due respect to her and her obvious talent, we've seen teams with Marina Mabrey as a featured piece lose a lot of games in the last few years. She tends to put up good numbers on bad teams. I think they're really reliant on people like Niara Sabali actually being healthy and productive. And we've seen her play well in flashes in the WNBA. She was obviously incredibly important for New York in the year that they won a championship in the playoffs. But whether she can stay healthy for a month at a time has been difficult the whole time she's been in this league. So yeah, they've got some pieces. I like Julie Alamond as a point guard. I've always liked Brittany Sykes. There's talent here, but yeah, it feels like they're going to be sort of piecing it together and trying to hold it together. I'm not sure they're necessarily going to be as good as they're hoping to be.
Yeah, it will be really interesting. I think of obviously like we both think a different process than the Fire are building. A side note to the tempo, I wanted to make sure we gave our flowers to our own Chelsea Late, who obviously is on the pod almost weekly with us here. But yesterday she announced that she is joining the team at TSN Sports as the Toronto Tempo WNBA beat reporter. We all know how hard, Chelsea has worked and how excited we are for her, to have that opportunity. So I wanted to make sure that we gave her a shout out because that is obviously very big step for her in her career.
Yeah, absolutely. Can only echo that. I yeah, hope she comes back and hangs out with us once occasionally as well. But yeah, good luck to her. I also like that she's working on Sports Center, but when the center is actually spelt the proper way with the RE rather than the ER. So yeah, she's on the version that uses the right spelling.
Yes, I did see that note from you yesterday as well. So it made me definitely laugh at that. But Richard, just some final thoughts on, do you have any surprise, cuts or, maybe where we see some signings pop up in the developmental spots? Just any other general takeaways now that, training camp has obviously ended and we are on, the brink of the season starting.
Well, one thing I can note is that on our website now there is a page where you can go and look up all of the developmental players, so you can see all of those signings. One to look out for maybe later in the season is Marine Fotux, who's at New York, who's a French point guard who's been to 2 Olympic Games already. So I think she's coming in with an injury that she's still recovering from, but which will be why they haven't just used her to cover for the space they've got at the moment. But yeah, look for her later in the season to maybe add to New York's options at guard. Toronto signed Mariella Fasula as a sort of backup post who they might need quite quickly. Yeah, so those are maybe a couple to look out for in the developmental. Across the league, I'm looking forward to seeing who jumps out from the sort of unexpected teams. We know New York should be good. We know Las Vegas should be a contender again. That Atlanta are being listed among the top. But a couple of years ago, no one expected Minnesota to be as good as they were with all their new pieces. So yeah, who's going to be that team? Who's the contender that comes out of nowhere? Because someone's going to be better than we're expecting them to be right now.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think there is always a team or two that, definitely takes us by surprise. Hard to believe it's the 30th year of this league. I know we are all very thrilled that it's not only here, but like thriving and growing. And I tweeted something out like, we know the hoops is going to be good. The storylines never fail to be here for the league. There's always something that we get to talk about. But I want to make sure that all of us are checking out her hoop stats, whether it's on social media, whether you're, viewing the pod on YouTube. But most importantly, now that the season is kicking off, make sure you're finding yourself to herhoopstats.com, where, like Richard said, you can go and track the spending, the developmental players. And I think this year more than ever, that's going to be really important just because there is more financial flexibility. Like you said, they're not pinching the pennies of $5 like they used to. And it's really just a one-stop shop. I say that often, but where you can kind of get your news, your facts, your numbers all in one place. But most importantly, another note, I wanted to give a shout out. Happy Mother's Day. Do you guys celebrate that, Richard?
We'd have it, but I think we have it a different day from you guys.
Okay.
So it's Mother's
Yeah.
Day for you, but not for us at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so upcoming Sunday, Mother's Day. I know there are so many, obviously, women in this league, even that are mothers that are balancing both. So shout out to all the moms or mom figures that, obviously put in a lot of hours every single day to enrich the lives of young ones and even old ones because, mothers never really stop parenting as much as they, say they do. But just a shout out there. But most importantly, let's just enjoy the 30th season of this league. I know we're going to be in for some very exciting hoops. So for Richard and myself, enjoy tonight. There's going to be some amazing. And I forgot B-Mac wants to hop in here.
I couldn't help myself. In fact, let me make sure for the people viewing on YouTube, I don't want you to get confused. This is not Miami. I am in the office of Debbie Antonelli.
This is our Emmy.
Yeah. Might be when I go home. Anyway, I am in the office of Debbie Antonelli, and I am here because of what I've been talking about off and on for the last couple of weeks here on the podcast. For Richard, the American Mother's Day weekend, we are having the 8th annual 24 hours of nothing but net. It's something that Debbie got inspiration to do back in 2019 because of her son, Frankie, her middle son, Frankie, that has Down syndrome. She started a 24-hour free throw shooting marathon where she makes 100 free throws for every hour for 24 hours. And she is shooting in her 7-year average 93%, which makes it very difficult for the person in charge of putting content for the rest of the hour of the 24 hours. So you're welcome. But no, Team Antonelli has raised over $1.4 million in 7 years. And we are looking to get as close to that 2 million mark this year as we can. So if you are anywhere near Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, please come out to the town hall. The Deb is what we're calling it. This Debbie Antonelli Gymnasium. So we will be there for the next 2 days looking to raise some money for Special Olympics. And if you want to donate, 24hoursmbn.com. The link will be in the show notes of today's episode. But yeah, I'm here. We're ready to roll.
Yeah, definitely an amazing cause that Debbie has started. I know it's something Kristen and myself donate to every single year. But like you said, getting bigger and better, I think, every single year. I think Kristen and Debbie still argue about the non-stat starter in NC State history. So, make sure she's up in that free throw percentage this year, B-Mac.
Hey, if she ups it anymore, I'm going to have to get more content. I might have to call you guys to come in for an interview or something.
I love it. Well, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Obviously, the WNBA tipping off tonight. And then, like B-Mac mentioned, feel free to check out the Debbie Antonelli, the 24 hours free throw-a-thon. So for us, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the hoops. We will see you back next week on Monday with another episode of Her Hoop Stats.